it took me 2 years before I watched that game again. We celebrated that night, obviously. We went into town and had a few beers for the journey that we'd been on. Yeah, to be taken away in the last moment like that was pretty devastating.
We're delighted to be joined by former Wallabies legend and World Cup winner Stephen Larkham. How things, mate? Great to have you on the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good at the moment. Yeah, we're in the off season. 6 months. You got to wait over here. You got to wait 6 months to get another chance. So we bowed out in the semi-final stages this year. So yeah, we've got a fair weight on our hands. We're in the midst of reviewing the season at the moment. Hopefully, starting some training in a couple of weeks.
Lovely. How has it been home? I know you've done the rounds a little bit, spent some time over in Ireland as well. What's it like for an Australian legend being back on home turf full time?
It's good, yeah. Like, it was good to get over to Ireland. It's, rugby is phenomenally well supported over in Europe and particularly in Ireland. And Munster is one of the best teams in the world in terms of the support. So it was great to be over there in that environment as a coach, sort of an up-and-coming coach still. I was head coach of the Brumbies before I left, but really had no idea what I was doing. So, the 3 years over in Ireland really developed me as a coach, and trying to bring some of that back. That's the challenge. Obviously, I love the Brumbies. I owe a lot to the Brumbies, and I'm trying to bring all of my knowledge from both playing years and coaching years back into the Brumbies.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about previous World Cups, but I've got to start with this World Cup. You headed back to the Brumbies. You did pretty well. Did Eddie give you a call, or would you just decline the call if he did?
I wouldn't have declined the call. I would have declined the offer, though. It was pretty intense. Coaching over in Europe, playing over in Europe, it's pretty full on. Super Rugby. As a player, I came out of Super Rugby. Most years, all but two, I went into the Wallaby setup. So you kind of 6 months with the Wallabies, and then you're another 4 or 5 months there with the Wallabies, and you get a month off, and then you're back into that cycle again. As a coach in Super Rugby, you're coaching for 6 months, and then you kind of got this off season. So a really good time to reflect on the season, have a look at other competitions, try and develop your coaching style. And I kind of need that at the moment. Over in Europe, it was full on, right? It was, we had COVID. I was there for COVID, and we tried to get a program running the whole way through COVID as well. So there was no break. You get maximum 5 weeks off, and you're back into it over there. So I needed the time off, and had Eddie called me, it would have been thanks, but it's not for me right now.
Yeah, the coaching space, really interesting. We've got mates, like really good mates of ours that coach at the highest level as well now. And it seems like from the outside looking in, it's one of the toughest jobs. Not to moan, I know there's incredibly tough jobs. My mate Mike works in a Halfords factory and he loves it, by the way. But as a coach, how hard is it in that space, being on the road, time away from family and all these things? Like, how married to your job do you need to be the very best?
Yeah, I think, most of the best coaches in the world have gone through some sort of breakup. I think it's, previously it's part and parcel of getting to the top. I'm luckily still married to my first wife.
You look pumped about it as well.
There's struggles. There's struggles all the time. As a player, it was pretty full on. Like I said, it was with the Brumbies, and you're travelling a little bit. Like back when we were playing, we played in South Africa as well. So you had a two-week trip to South Africa. You were in New Zealand twice a year. You had finals, which might have been away in South Africa or New Zealand. Then you had the domestic legs as well. So there was a fair bit of travel, but it was mainly 2 days before. Similar to Europe with Munster, when COVID hit, we were travelling by charter just about everywhere. So it was almost the day of, or certainly the day before, and then we were flying back straight after the game. Which made it a lot easier. And there were no really big tours, although South Africa came in the last year. We sort of had, in the URC competition, you've got a 2-week tour to South Africa as well. So it was pretty intense as a player coming out of Super Rugby with those scenarios into 6 months of Test rugby where you were never based in Canberra. Like the Brumbies, the Wallabies were never based in Canberra. It was always a camp up north where it was warm because Canberra gets ridiculously cold. Or at least in Sydney, which is somewhat warmer. So that was a challenge as a player. And I remember my speech in my last game for the Brumbies against the Crusaders, which we won, but it wasn't enough to get to the finals. So that was our last home game, last round game. And I said, I'll make up for it to my wife in front of everyone. I said, I'll make up for it when rugby's over. I'll make up for it. Now, rugby's not over, obviously. I'm still coaching. But, the workload as a coach is pretty full on, right? As a player, you guys would know, as a player, it's pretty easy. It's pretty cruisy. You come in, you do your job, you go home. I'm encouraging all our players, and I was the same, you get away from rugby, really. That's the essence of it. Get away from rugby so that you can bring that intensity and energy back in when you come in for training or a game. But as a coach, there's so much prep work. It's reviewing games, it's reviewing training, it's sitting down with players. And now a different level, obviously, as an assistant coach, which I've been for about half of my coaching career. You are really player-faced. You're thinking about training. You're implementing a lot of training drills. As a head coach now, it's more people management. So most of my time is not just with the players, it's with the staff as well, trying to get around to everyone, making sure that everyone's nice and comfortable and able to do their job to the best of their ability. So it's one of those scenarios where I promised I'd do it when I get out of rugby, but I'm not out of rugby yet.
She's going to hold you to that then, mate, definitely. Talking about your... Yeah, there you go. Talking about your coaching style now, I used to love watching you as a player. Obviously, the intellect of a 10 and that Brumbies mentality, who Jim and I were very privileged to have played with a few lads that played at the Brumbies as well. Pat Howard was the biggest influence on my career, I think. But you always seemed quite an intelligent but laid-back character, not in terms of didn't care about the game, but you weren't a ranter or a raver like you see some fly halves in the modern day. What's your coaching philosophy like? Because you can't just rant and rave every day, as I'm sure you don't, and you can't just be laid back and not really get the hairdryer out when it's needed. So what's your kind of philosophy like as a coach? Is it more thoughtful? Is it, you G the players up in different ways? Because we see some coaches, like look at Eddie, give yourself an ABBA mate. But, what is it like for you as a head coach?
Very individualised. So trying to understand the player, I think, is my biggest strength as a coach. So introverted, pretty much growing up an introvert. As a player, introverted until I drank too much, and then the opposite. As a coach, obviously communication is key. So I've been working on that, I guess, since I've started coaching. I've been working on trying to be a better communicator, no doubt about that. But understanding the individual is probably my strength, and knowing how to push them is something that I keep working on. It's not something that's perfected yet. And then, so I guess that's my style in terms of trying to motivate people. From an individual point of view, there's often, as a coach, you've obviously got to motivate the whole group. And that varies, yeah. It's very thoughtful about how I motivate the whole group, certainly thinking about, where we've been and what's sort of coming up and where the motivation needs to sit. But the biggest philosophy, I guess, I have as a coach is making sure that the players have control. So we can't, as much as you like to think as a coach you've got control on game day, you don't. There's times where you're sending messages down for incidents that have happened 5-6 minutes ago, and you've got no control over what's happening in the next 5 minutes, really, once the players get out there. So, yeah, it's making sure, I'm very individualised with my motivation, and then making sure the players have the ability to control the game when they're out there.
So on the colour works thing they do in businesses, you're like a blue, which means like data driven, can't be trusted, psychopath when he loses. I'm joking.
Look, I will. I'll get angry. But you got to know who you can get angry at, right? And I probably learnt that from Eddie more than anyone else. Eddie was a specialist at picking and choosing the right targets there.
Steve, what's the lay of the land in Australia now with rugby? Because you just mentioned Ireland, like it's booming there. We kind of get snippets of it with Eddie being back in the mix now. Petra Stupasi, good mate of mine, was coaching the scrum as well over there. But as in just the kind of lay of the land, because the Lions tour's there's in 2 years, then the World Cup another 2 years after that.
There is a lot of hope and expectation that we're going to get a lot of publicity out of the Lions tour, the World Cup. Eddie's come back in, and I think he's done a tremendous job at advertising the game. That's what Eddie does. He's very good at presenting in front of the media, whether it's controversial or not. Most of it is controversial, but it's putting rugby in the spotlight again, which we certainly need. Like, we've got so much competition over here from all of the other codes, AFL, Rugby League, soccer. The Matildas have just played in Australia. You've got tennis. Like, everything really stacks up against rugby. So we need as much help as possible at the moment promoting the game, trying to get the game back there. And I think my biggest challenges as a coach of the Brumbies is to try and create an entertaining style. We're getting lots of viewers. So we've got Stan Sport as our major broadcaster over here at the moment. And from all reports, their numbers are quite good, but we're not getting people through the gate. Whereas over in Europe, when I was with Munster, we were getting people through the gate, and people were certainly following that online as well. So, yeah, my challenge as a coach is to make sure that we're playing some sort of entertaining style, that we are trying to promote the game as much as possible. Having Eddie back in there at the moment has certainly kick-started all of that for us, but that'll ramp up. All of the promotion of the game is certainly going to ramp up. 2027. Lions, when are they coming out? 2025, the World Cup in 27, and then the next World Cup as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Obviously, you talk about Eddie and the headlines he's given us. The headline that I'm looking at is he hasn't won a game yet, which I think is great. Sorry, Steve, I know you're a proud Australian, but we're not doing very well either, by the way. How do you see this going for Australia at the World Cup? Is there any expectation in Australia? Can you see, Eddie doing what Eddie does and doing things really well at a World Cup and progressing his team far down the track, or what's the thoughts?
Yeah, still optimistic. I think we've picked, Eddie's picked a young team. I'm obviously a little bit disappointed because we've kind of got 16 Wallabies on our books at the moment with the Brumbies. So out of a squad of 35 to 40, depending on injuries, we've got 16 of those as Wallabies. And at the moment, we've got 5 of those guys picked in the Wallabies at the moment. So I would prefer to have a lot more of the Brumbies in the Wallaby setup at the moment. But I can understand where Eddie's going. He's spoken about giving guys an opportunity, and that's what Eddie does. He's given some guys an opportunity. Now we've missed all of those opportunities so far, and he's now reverted into looking at the next World Cup, but also giving ourselves a chance at this World Cup by bringing these young, exciting players. And I think he has picked, there's obviously a couple of Brumbies players that I would put in there as well, but I think he's picked a really good, young, exciting group of players that could, if they get it right, surprise a lot of teams in the world. So I don't know we're just looking at the results. We've had 2 Bledisloe Cups this year, and we're always, our ranking is really low in terms of world rankings because we're constantly playing against New Zealand every year. It's 2-3 games against New Zealand. So it's hard to win those games, particularly when they've got so much depth and they're playing with a good style at the moment. We actually played exceptionally well. If you look at the second Bledisloe, if anyone wants to get out there and have a look at that second Bledisloe, the first 40 minutes was phenomenal rugby that would beat any team in the world if we can keep that going for 80 minutes. The challenge will be, I guess, all of these guys, and particularly the young guys that are in the squad at the moment, have come out of dry weather footy. Like, we had a perfect Super Rugby campaign where there was hardly any rain. And now the game against France on the weekend it was Monday night for us. On Monday, it was raining. And I think that's going to be the challenge for these guys. They just don't know how to play in those conditions at the moment. So if they can get a couple of those games, if that's going to be a feature of the World Cup, if they can get a couple of those games in the early pool rounds, then it might set them up for some good performances later on.
I love how you said New Zealand and you didn't mention South Africa. This would probably be from your career, right? And it's interesting chatting to Australians. You chat to the Kiwis, they talk about South Africa. But you chat to Australia, it's all about New Zealand. Is that still a thing, is it? Is New Zealand the one, even though that South Africa are probably better at the minute?
Yeah, that was an impressive game, South Africa's game. I thought that was also a phenomenal game to watch against New Zealand. I guess I'm probably going back to when I was growing up, like the big rivalry in Australia. There was no rugby championship when I was growing up. South Africa wasn't a fixture for the Wallabies for a long period of time. And, we would play in New Zealand regularly. So it was always, I'd go down to the club as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, my local club, my dad was a rugby player, so sort of fanatical about the Wallabies, and we'd be sitting there watching the Bledisloe Cups, and that was it. That was the biggest thing. Like, that was the biggest thing in my club. It was always about beating New Zealand, and I guess that's continued on with me. Yeah, South Africa, rightly so, are number one in the world. They play, a really dominating style of rugby. They've got the players to play that way, and it's impressive the way that they play the game. And sorry, I should have mentioned them, but I still see New Zealand. We talk about it in Super Rugby now. So Super Rugby is only Australia and New Zealand now, right? So I'm constantly thinking about how to beat the New Zealand teams, because since the inception of Super Rugby, Brumbies have pretty much been the best team. Now, other teams have won it in Australia, I get that, but we've been the most consistent performing Australian team. And our challenge every year is obviously beating the Australian teams first, but it's that next step up then. Can we beat the New Zealand teams at home first, and then can we beat them away? No Australian team has beaten a New Zealand team in finals in New Zealand ever in the history of the Super Rugby competition. So that's where my head is at the moment, certainly New Zealand.
There we go. Well, let's take your head back then to 99. That amazing World Cup over on our shores. Some unbelievable memories. You had an amazing team, some big characters. Tim Horan, I had the pleasure of playing with him for a year at Saracens. John Eales. I need to ask you, how does John Eales end up kicking goals? Was it a bit of a joke to start off with, Ealesy, come and have a go at this, and he's just ridiculous? Or how did that start? Because what a sight that was.
Well, that's the problem when you have a 5'8" who can't kick goals. Other people have got to step up and do it. That wasn't my forte. I was a kicker growing up. Like, I was a halfback growing up, and I did all the kicking for my junior teams. And I did kick for the Brumbies and the Wallabies when I first started, and then I had my knee injury before the 99 World Cup. And then I just struggled to get the hours. You know what it's like, Goody, you obviously know, as a goal kicker or kicker in general, the amount of hours and the amount of kicks that you have to put in through the week to be a good kicker on the weekend. I just couldn't do it. So whilst I had a pretty good eye for kicking, I certainly wouldn't have had the percentage. So I was a clutch kicker if the other guys had fallen over. So we had sort of Joe Roth was a goal kicker, Sterling Mortlock was a goal kicker, Matt Giddo was a goal kicker, John Eales was a goal kicker. Like, there's probably 5 other guys that were ahead of me because I couldn't put the work in. But given the opportunity in the game, my record was pretty good. I was something like 29 kicks in my professional career, 27 out of 29, something like that. So I only took ones. If I was kicking for the day, I was Brumbies kicker for the day, and we got a penalty that was not right in front with sort of 22 metres out, I'd say we're going to the corner. Anything outside that, I'd be putting it over the place. So some pretty phenomenal players. You're right. I think, like, undoubtedly that team, that 99 Wallabies team, was the best team in the world. Going into the tournament, surely favourites going into the tournament, the form that we showed through the tournament. And then if you look at the individuals as well, I think how many of those guys would have played in a World 15 at some stage in their professional career? And I would say just about everyone. Yeah, everyone, including the reserves, would have been in the World 15 at some stage in their position during their career. So we were blessed, I think, just through that period of having really good players. Some core players out of the Brumbies, but the Reds made up the bulk of that team as well, sort of a spattering from Reds, Waratahs and Brumbies. But the Reds had a lot of success before Super Rugby kicked off. They were the Super 10 champions. And then that sort of carried into Super Rugby, and then the Brumbies had a bit of success. And yeah, it was just a phenomenal period for Australian rugby. We'd won everything that there was to win. We'd won Super Rugby, not before 99, obviously around that era, 99 through to 2004. Brumbies won 2001, 2004. We won the Cook Cup, we won the World Cup, we won the Bledisloe Cup, Rugby Championship, like everything that you could win in World Rugby, we won. And it was the nucleus of that team from 99 that went on to do all of that.
And when you go through the archives, Stephen, you mentioned not kicking, but one of the most iconic things that I think we've seen was that semi-final against South Africa. Was that a clutch kick 48 metres out or 68 metres out? I don't know how far it is now as the time's gone on, but I mean, when you go back through the archives, it is one of the things that sticks out, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For me, I mean, I was just out the farm. Dad lives on a farm. I grew up on a farm. I was just out there. He's down the coast house at the moment, so I just went out there to try and look for some stuff that we left out there when we came over to Ireland. And there was a not a painting, but it's the 6 best moments in Wallaby history, and mine is one of those in terms of the kick. So it's special to be sort of remembered that way. It was a fluke. It was 100% fluke. Like we'd be drawn at full time and came into the sheds, and the assistant coach Tim Lane at the time said, "If you get a chance to take a field goal, just take it." Knowing that my record was 0 from about 100 at that stage, and in the back of my head was, big pressure game, pressure moment. Everything was about territory. Playing down the other end of the field, if you make a mistake down there, we've got a chance with the best goal kicker in the world at the time, Matt Burke. He'll slot 3 points. So it was getting the ball, hit Grazie up off the line out, and then I get it on second phase, and I didn't see anyone on the outside of me. Like I thought there was, that was a low percentage play, throwing it wide. And the second thought was, we'll just kick it dead. But they just brought in the law change where you couldn't kick it dead. If you kicked it dead, it came all the way back to the scrum. Previous to that, it was kick it dead and it went to a 22, which would have been great for us as well. The only way you could get that result was by taking a field goal, and if that missed, it was still a 22. So that was in my head. I'll just kick it down here with a field goal, kick it dead, and then they'll have a 22 restart. And it was just one of those fluky things. It started off the boot outside the right upright, and it sort of hooked back massively and then squared up through the posts. And I was as surprised as anyone. As a player, I never showed emotion on the field. I thought you can never give away that emotion because it'll always come back and haunt you. And it was one of those moments where I just couldn't, I just beamed with my mouth guard, super happy. Roffey came up and gave me a cuddle. I was running backwards, and then sort of dawned on me we've still got a game to play here. But at the moment that it went over, it was, I think I've just won the game. Now, don't tell anyone this, but Berkey's filthy, because he obviously, after that, then kicked a penalty goal that secured the win for us, maybe 2 even. And I get all the plaudits for...
No one talks about it.
No one remembers that, Berkey. No one remembers that, Berkey. Obviously, leading into the World Cup, you were favourites, as you said then before, talking about everything that you've won. And that World Cup was... really interesting. The first time a lot of eyes had been on a global tournament, I think, from especially this side of the world. After 95 with the Jonah story, the whole France-New Zealand semi-final, which was at Twickenham, the most unbelievable game. Build into the final, and I look back, World Cup finals are normally tense affairs, aren't they? And you see that in history, some close games. But that final that you guys are going into against the French, and it was a comfortable victory from an outsider's point of view watching it, was the sheer confidence, was the sheer belief, was the, this is just going to get done? Because you had a little scare against Africa in the semi-final until the golden right boot comes out with a monster drop goal. But was it just an expectation of, we're the better team and we need to rock up on the day and win comfortably? Because it looked comfy from the outsider's point of view.
We had been together for 2 years. It was a 2-year build-up, and Rod McQueen was our coach. He based us up in Queensland, in Caloundra on the coast, a relatively small coastal town. We had our own training facility, a couple of fields that we could train on, a big gym, a pool beside that gym, accommodation where the whole family could stay. And it was a 2-year build into that tournament. So we'd been working a long time into it. We had the best defensive record in the round games. Only 1 try was scored against us leading into the finals. So there was a lot of belief in the team. That New Zealand-France game was a real shock to us as well. We'd done all of our homework, obviously playing New Zealand in the Bledisloes. We had a pretty good game plan in terms of how to beat them, and we were just going to march that out for the final. And then we got shocked, like everyone else, that the French turned it on, scored some amazing tries. And we didn't actually have a game plan for the French, and probably didn't have enough time to even think about it. The coaches certainly hadn't thought about it. So when you look at that game, we just kicked. I just kicked the whole time. Down the other end of the field, backed out of fence. Berkey kicked penalty after penalty after penalty. Tooney scores in the corner, second half, late in the second half, and then Owen scores in the second half as well to sort of secure that win. But that blew the score out. Right up until that point, it was sort of trading penalties, and we were just there wasn't much to it. We were just trying to back out a fence, play down the other end of the field, and we knew it would all come together if we got opportunities. I think that was the special element of that team, was that we were excellent at capitalising on opportunities because we had that combination. We just knew that there was an opportunity here to take, and we were the best team in the world at taking those opportunities.
We're the Campai 15. I don't know if you know about this, but we're building a Campai 15 with the 3 best players you'd like to have a beer with, either off the field. There might be people that you've played with or against, but 3 players you'd like to share a beer with off the field.
I guess the first guy would probably be Justin Harrison. You guys probably know him.
Goog.
Yeah. He's a little bit like you, Jim. He's a Kia.
Hang on, wait, Steve. Hang on. He's a little bit like me. Go on. Why? What have you heard?
He's a Kia, so we call him a Kia, as in KIA. Yeah. He's a know-it-all.
Yeah, keep going.
Go on.
He's a know-it-all.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably where he resembles you a little bit.
There you go.
Yeah. He's got the gift of the gab, similar to you, Jim, as well. So similarities there. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but he is mostly always right. So it's good to have people like that. I guess that's you, Jim, right?
Yes, that is very much like me. But I have spent a night in Hong Kong. Yeah, no, I'm always think that I'm right. But I spent a night with him in Hong Kong, and he refers to himself as the pregnant snake, and I don't see myself as that. I'm in a lot better shape, is what I want to say. He's been through the mill.
He has. I just saw him after the game, Australia versus France, and he was interviewing a couple of players there, Tate McDermott and one other player, and he's got the side profile going, but he's got his jacket open, and he's 100% the pregnant snake. Yeah, it's very embarrassing for him. There's nothing wrong with that, but yeah, he's certainly let himself go.
That a boy. So he's first in. Surely you're going to go George Gregan as well, your partner in crime.
I could, yeah. I mean, Griggs joined us late, so he wasn't in Sydney, obviously. So he joined us via Zoom when he woke up, and fair effort to him. We started playing some games at, I don't know, about 12:30 at night, our time, and it must have been mid-morning for him, and he was sitting there and he was pretending to play along, and he lost 4 in a row. We didn't rig it or anything. He lost 4 in a row, and he wanted to kick on, which was good, and we were obviously exhausted, and we cut the Zoom off, but he was pretty keen to kick on. Yeah, he's like Griggs to have as someone that you'd want to go out and drink with. Yeah, I mean, he's going to open a lot of doors for you, isn't he? So he's going to have some value for you, one, and then two, I don't know if you know anything about his physique, but that always can be quite entertaining. And then the third thing is, yeah, he's quite funny. He's you would have been out with him a couple of times. He's someone that can also talk exceptionally well, and he remembers everything. He's got all the stories. He's got all the lingo from day dot with the Brumbies to the Wallabies all the way through. He remembers everything. So there's some amazing stories that he can relive. And mostly when you go out and drink, it's all about reliving stories, because you always want to remember how good you were, right?
What about the rig, though? I don't know that. I know that he's into his training. He's got an online PC company. But more specifically, is there more stuff around the rig? Is it below the rig? I mean, What is it?
Let's just leave it that way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. We had hey, Steve, we'll get him in at some point. We'll put him into the filthy 15 if that's what it is. So we've got Justin Harrison, we have got George Gregan, and you've got to pick one more.
Okay, so I'd probably just go with Eddie. I guess I'm a bit of a rugby nut. Rugby is now my career. As much as I didn't want to be a rugby nut, about halfway through my career, you get to that stage where I've got to get away from rugby. It's exhausting. I've ended up in rugby, and yeah, I'm passionate about it. I'm certainly passionate about the Brumbies and rugby in Australia. And if you are going to be that sort of a person, then you've got to pick someone like Eddie, right, who knows everything about everything rugby, who's also, I've been out a couple of times with Eddie on the drink. He's also extremely funny. He's got a really dry sense of humour. So that's important on a night out. But then, just to sort of pick his brains, I guess that would be more of the sober conversation that you would have. It'd start with Eddie just trying to pick his brains, and then you'd move on to Goog and Griegs, and get a bit of a laugh out of those two.
And you know what it's like to win a World Cup. So when Johnny kicks that drop goal, I know where I was. I was 21. It was my 21st birthday party. I remember I was English at the time, so I was supporting England, of course. When that goes over, did you know? Did you know that was it? Did you feel that was the end? And how did you feel in that moment, being at home in Australia, favourites going into that off the back of the last World Cup as well? I say favourites. I mean, England were favourites, but you know what I mean? You were in the final, right?
Yeah, I guess a little bit surreal for me because I really had no concept of the build-up. I was just in a game of rugby at that stage. It sort of dawned on me, I guess. It took me 2 years before I watched that game again. That's how much it hurt. We celebrated that night, obviously. We went into town and had a few beers for the journey that we'd been on. To be taken away in the last moment like that was pretty devastating. But it happens in rugby, doesn't it? Like I've been, you play enough games when you play. I played over 200 professional games, and you've had plenty of those moments in professional games where the game's just been taken away from you. And I guess it hurts more because you're on home soil and you're probably favourites going into that game. And it's the World Cup final. So there's no bigger game in the game than the World Cup final.
Just one last question from me.
Yeah.
Going into that tournament, you guys had come off the back of some massive losses to the All Blacks.
Yep.
There was no real expectation that, well, maybe that's just from a New Zealand side, that you guys could make it to the final. You look at teams going into this World Cup in similar situations, like England, like New Zealand getting pumped by South Africa. How much do those games pre-World Cup matter in your eyes, considering what you know from 2003?
Well, if you look at it the other way, and I'll put the shoe on the other foot, particularly coming from Ireland, I think Ireland have probably been favourites going into every single World Cup because of their form coming into the World Cup, and ultimately failed when the pressure comes on in World Cups. Now, for whatever reason, that's happened for them. And I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but we had really strong belief. I think what it comes down to is combination. So the ability to have your best players on the field in the big games and to have enough consistency going into that big game for those blokes to find some connection. So with Eddie, I guess with the Wallabies, you've got 5 games in a row that we've lost now, but we have for the last couple of games started to find some really good form in patches through that game or through those games. So there is an opportunity with this group, if he can keep them together and keep them on the field, keep that combination together, to build it through the campaign. And we did that in 2003. You're right, we didn't have very successful lead into the World Cup, but we had a lot of belief. We had a camp up in Darwin that solidified the team. You've obviously got to get that mix right. You've got to get your training atmosphere right where the boys are fit and know what they're doing, but you've also got to get that connection off the field. And Eddie was really good at doing that leading into 2003. He did the same thing with the Wallabies. Took them up to Darwin. I don't know exactly where they went in Northern Territory, but similar sort of a field, trying to get that connection off the field. And then they're showing those glimpses. So for us, it was, a combination of the stuff that we did off the field, the characters that we had on the field, and making sure that we had the right team on the field for that final with enough continuity leading into that final to play well. And we did. We played well. It just slipped away from us in the last couple of minutes there.
Yeah. Lastly from me, Stephen, before you go, what's it like to win a World Cup? You mentioned your dad was a massive Wallabies fan. I mean, I can't even imagine how he felt, but the fact that you've won it, how does it feel? Is it something that you reflect on?
That was, speaking to a couple of people post that as well, it's not something that I reflected on in my career at all, because I was 24 going into that year, 25 during the World Cup. And it felt like I was just on the start of my journey and that there were going to be many more to come. And now I guess you look back and you start to realise, I've been there as a coach as well with the Wallabies in 2015, and we lost the final there to New Zealand as well, that you start to realise the more you've been in the game and the more prestige that gets built up around the World Cup, that it is really difficult to win, that you've got to win pretty much every game through the tournament to win the trophy, and that is a tough ask. So I think now, to have had that ability to win a World Cup and to have taken it was pretty special. And it'll certainly, are my kids proud of it? Probably not. My grandkids will probably be proud of it. I think that's the way it works with your lineage. But I took, like, out of that 99 World Cup, I got inspiration for that 99 World Cup out of 91. I was of that generation in 1991 when we won it, 15, 16, 17-year-old who was mad about rugby in a family of mad about rugby people, that I got the inspiration from that to then go on to win 1999. And there's a couple of guys that in this team now that are probably old enough to know the team of, some of the players in the 99 team, but the majority of the guys haven't got the inspiration of a Wallabies team winning. So, it's special for me now, but at the time, certainly as a player, it was something that I thought I would do again.
And your dad? What was he like?
They were over there, so they were proud. I guess you don't necessarily see it as a young kid. You don't see how much it means to your parents. As a parent now, I obviously see it the other way, and I also see the fact that I don't want to get too excited when my kids do it. But Dad was over there with some good friends with my mum, and was certainly part of the celebrations. And it was special for them as well. They've got the stuff up around the house. He's proud, I guess. He's proud, one, to be a rugby player, to be a Canberra rugby player who's been a part of the Brumbies setup, and now to have a son who has represented Australia, because, there's no doubt in my mind that that's what everyone wanted to do in my generation, and certainly the generation before in the amateur era. It was all about playing for the Wallabies. So, to have made him proud is a pretty special thing for me to take with me.
Stephen, thank you so much for coming on, mate. It's been class to hear you chat about the World Cup and first hand. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.